everyone for being here. And my pop did reference this skewer. Skewer is a paying homage to one of my favorite teachers growing up, Miss Ewan. And she always made sure you were paying attention. So I figured I'd channel a little bit of that energy. So a little bit of background on myself. I'm 26 years old. And I come from a family of history buffs. My grandfather, my brothers, my father. But I'm actually the least versed in all of this. In my rebellious nature, I always thought, that was my father's thing. He reenacted with my brothers, but I always, skateboarding and basketball and all that fun stuff. And it really wasn't until after his passing that I got an appreciation of the Civil War. So we went on this trip, and it was arguably one of the best trips of my life. Here we are just outside of Bolivar Heights with Old Baldy, starting our excursion. And Bolivar Heights at the time was located in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is located in modern day West Virginia. And here it is. Here's a map of the counties. And here's Bolivar Heights in the county. And as we were driving into Harper's Ferry, we had a tour guide, and they were explaining to us the significance of the two rivers, the Shenandoah and the Potomac. And I was just stricken by how vast these rivers are. I mean, you read about it, but being there really puts into perspective. This is some difficult terrain, and it's also quite gorgeous. We took both these pictures, and again, I can still feel like being there. I feel the power of the rivers, and it was just beautiful. So when you're learning about Harper's Ferry, the main character that stood out to me was John Brown. I thought he's one of the most interesting characters I've ever learned in my entire life. And there's conflicting stories of him. Right here you can see it's a John Brown, hero or terrorist. And right here is a statue of him. It's a young boy. John Brown's got his hand on his shoulder. The boy's looking up to him. And then in this one, he looks like a crazy person. He's got a weird look in his eye. And, who is this guy? But again, as you can see, there's a statue right here. And it says, erected to the memory of John Brown by a grateful people. So, you don't get a statue if you're just some nobody. So John Brown, he lived from May 9th, 1800 to December 2nd, 1859. And he was only 59 years old, which always struck me because you see portraits of him, and that's a pretty intense looking 59-year-old man. He must have had a crazy life. And it was really the images of John Brown that was like my first introduction of him. How have I never heard or seen this guy before? So, as I said, John Brown, he lived to 1859. And during that time, he fathered 21 children. Now, on a side note, as me, my brothers were looking to start families ourselves. 21 is crazy, just crazy. Yeah. So he was a violent, radical abolitionist, and he was driven by a sense of righteousness, believing that it was the divine right to carry out God's work of ending slavery. He participated in the events of Bleeding Kansas, and he eventually went on to lead the assault of Harper's Ferry. He's tried and hanged for his crimes, but he's immediately revered by pro-abolitionist forces. So this was the armory, but it's destroyed now. So the goals of Brown and his raiders were to attack and take hostage slaveholders, take the U.S. Armory, and to arm slaves and other abolitionist forces loyal to his cause. Now, at the time of the raid, on October 16th, 1859, the armory at Harper's Ferry was the second largest armory in the United States. It had tons of spears and cannons and rifles and anything you would need to arm and cause revolt. So Brown and two of his sons, Owen and Watson, they recruited and trained about 20 other men prior to the attack. And Brown and his raiders stormed Harper's Ferry, and they go on to capture Lewis Washington, the great-grandnephew of George Washington. And as we were on the tour at the time and we're hearing all about this in the John Brown Museum, I heard a rumor that he takes the sword of Lewis Washington. And I can only imagine that just fueled his ego. Yeah, this is divine right. I got the sword, let's do this. It's the beginning of the raid. Nothing really serious has happened on their end yet. So he's probably feeling good. Lewis Washington, the great-grandnephew of George Washington, is just one of many characters in this story. So the raiders soon go on to overtake an Ohio Railroad train, which was bound for D.C. at the time. And ironically, the first casualty of Brown's raid was a freed black man who was a train porter, and he refused to give in to the raiders' demands, and he was actually shot in the back. So I just found that ironic. And here's the town of Harper's Ferry in the 1850s. And here it is in the 2020s. And as you can see, very little has changed. And the nature is still as beautiful as it was. But you can also understand the importance of this town. You would understand why we want the armory at Harper's Ferry. You can see it's connected to the rail lines, the two rivers. You can easily ship arms and munitions wherever they had to go. Here's the firehouse where John Brown and his raiders are eventually overtaken. Here are some of the spears. So, yeah, imagine coming in action, pretty graphic stuff. Now, Brown and his raiders go on to capture the armory, and they only control the armory for about 36 hours. But as I was reading all this and learning all about it, I'm just again swinging back by the fact that all this is happening before the Civil War. So this crazy attack on Harper's Ferry, these people aren't expecting a war or a battle. This is just an average night for them, and out of the blue, you have basically a terrorist attack. So the raiders were quickly opposed by local militia and railroad workers. It was hand-to-hand combat and sniper fire, which led to fatalities for both the raiders and the militia. One of which was the local mayor. So again, I just put myself in the shoes of a citizen of Harper's Ferry. You're just trying to sleep one night, and then John Brown comes in, and train is messed up, and the mayor is getting attacked, and this is crazy. So he's surrounded. John Brown instructs Watson to negotiate a surrender, where his son Watson was quickly shot down by the militia. And as the shootout's going on, President Buchanan sends in 88 Marines, led by military leader Robert E. Lee at the time, to end the violent standoff. So again, another crazy character. And as I was reading on all these names are coming up, why isn't this a movie? Or a Netflix series?
It is. It is a movie.
Oh, I didn't know.
It probably will take that.
Yeah. Watch, go home and watch that.
Earl Flynn.
Being a producer.
Yeah, but I was like, how come I've never, how come this isn't a more popular story? John Brown refuses to surrender, and the military Marines, they storm the armory to rescue the hostages, and the 11 remaining raiders were killed, including John Brown's other son. So in this night, he's lost his two children, he's realizing freedom is up, but he still holds true to this cause. So he gets arrested, and he's imprisoned in nearby Charlestown. And as I said, he's tried for treason against the Commonwealth of Virginia. And this is another famous, again, hand-painted painting of him leaving the courthouse. And as you can see, there's all types of commotion going on. You have what appear to be slaves being held back, but it almost looks like there's a celebrity about him. He's kissing a baby right here, a young black baby, and he's being almost revered as he's being carted to his death. And again, I just thought this is another colorful tale, like from all to the very end. This guy's a very colorful story. And it said, quoted at his trial, there's a quote right here, and it says, "Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood with the blood of my children and the blood of millions in this slave country, whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit. So let it be done." Again, like a very Shakespearean guy. He believed in his cause and to the very, very end, even when he knew it was ultimately over. So his death is witnessed by none other than future presidential assassin John Wilkes Booth. Again, just another character for this future Netflix series. And following his death, Brown is soon revered as a martyr by pro-abolitionist forces. In conclusion, John Brown was without a doubt one of the most colorful characters of Civil War history. John Brown has always stood out to me with his riveting tales of his life and travels. His willpower has always been inspirational, but moreover, a common thread throughout every story of John Brown was his fierce dedication to equality and fairness. From before his time as a violent participant in the events known as Bleeding Kansas to his execution in Virginia, John Brown never wavered in his belief that slaves will ultimately have to fight for their freedom. And the way he was able to sort of predict the Civil War, despite being killed years before it even broke out, I always found fascinating. Because again, this is before the internet, this is before he just needed to travel, and based on his travels and his life and the things he's seen, he was able to see the bigger picture. The day of his execution, it said that he wrote a note, and he passed the note to one of the prison guards. And the note was known as John Brown's last prophecy. And it states, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed, it might be done. So as he's walking to his death, he realizes that his event was one small step in this big thing to come, which eventually unfolds to become the Civil War. And so after we left Harper's Ferry, our trip doesn't necessarily go in chronological order. It goes more of a geographical driving order. So at this point, we went on to South Mountain, and there's various photos of us walking around South Mountain. But after the Battle of Second Manassas, Lee decided to move into Maryland. His goal was to fight and win battles causing Maryland to secede from the Union and also threaten Pennsylvania. Lee and Confederate President Jefferson Davis chose to invade Maryland, partly based on the belief that the people of the state would support them. Maryland was a so-called border state at the time, a slave state that remained in the Union. In moving north into Maryland, he needed to establish and protect a supply line up the Shenandoah Valley, which this led directly through Harper's Ferry. He thought Harper's Ferry had been abandoned by Union troops. However, when he found out this was not the case, he decided to split his forces, sending Stonewall Jackson up the valley to attack and seize Harper's Ferry in the west, while the remainder of his forces moved up the east. In Special Order 191, this was Lee's order for his generals, as was explained in last month's presentation. The order was found by Union privates wrapped around 3 cigars. These were immediately sent to McClellan. McClellan used his intelligence to attack Lee at South Mountain as Jackson was taking Harper's Ferry. After the battles at Fox, Crampton, and Turner's Gap, Lee moved his forces to Sharpsburg, and Jackson's forces rejoined Lee. Can we go to the next slide, please? And here's us on the tour. We're walking around South Mountain. Been a rainy day, but that didn't stop us. We had our ponchos, and it was a beautiful time. Now here we are. As we're walking South Mountain, this is one of the monuments, and this monument had actually been vandalized during like the COVID years. And before my father's death, he actually made it a point to get down there, and he was a part of the restoration effort to clean it up. So we actually made a trip to go down there, and it's still cleaned up. So it was nice. It was in the middle of almost nowhere. You had to really know where this was, and it wasn't an easy hike, through the mud and the muck, but he did it. And then later on, we went to the Battle of Antietam, which, on a side note, this is where I got a little spooked. There's a lot of oof when you're walking around Antietam. Oof is the word. So a lot of respect in the air. You can feel it. But there was excitement in Harper's Ferry and Antietam. There's a sacredness. So this set up the battle of Antietam. Right here's the cornfield. Repeated Union attacks and equally vicious Confederate counterattacks swept back and forth across Farmer David Miller's cornfield. Major General Joseph Mansfield of the 7th Corps supported Hooker's left. Attacking Jackson's Confederates from the East Woods, Mansfield was killed near the Smoketown Road. In this cornfield, these picture, we tried our best to do it justice. There's a little picture of our hand, but it seemed to go on for miles. And just the idea of this filled up with a bunch of young men, armed and sweaty and just exhausted. And there was a lot to take in. And this was the Bloody Lane, speaking of oomph. So on September 17th, 1862, during the Battle of Antietam, otherwise known as Sharpsburg, over 5,500 Union and Confederate soldiers were killed or wounded in a 3.5-hour fight that centered on a low road right here where we were standing. And this is about 2 pickup trucks, 2 Ford F-150s, maybe in length, and just filled with men and soldiers and corpse. And just, it earned its name, and you feel it as you're walking around there. So right here is the Pry House, which was General McClellan's headquarters at the time he was at Antietam. Right here is Burnside's Bridge. This later goes on to be captured by Union forces late in the afternoon. Here's us outside of Burnside's Bridge. And same shoes as I'm wearing tonight. Hockey shoes, yellow laces. And this is Antietam National Cemetery, again, which paid just the theme of respect and sacredness. It's a very beautiful cemetery. Now, Antietam National Cemetery in Sharpsburg, Maryland, has 4,776 Union soldiers buried there, along with 2,800 Confederate soldiers. The cemetery also includes the remains of over 200 non-Civil War dead. 1,836 of the Union soldiers are unknown, and all of them are marked with a small square stones that contain the grave numbers. So all these numbers, this amount of Union, this amount of Confederates, but at the end of the day, they were all Americans. They were all somebody's children, they were all somebody's husband, brother, and that's how they really should be remembered. So right here on this plaque, it reads, "Rest on, embalmed and sainted dead, dear as the blood ye gave, no impious footstep here shall tread the herbage of your grave." Again, as you can see, just very little tombstones unmarked, and it felt sacred. As somebody who just buried their father less than, about 2 summers ago, and we really made a point of emphasis to make sure he had like a beautiful grave, and then you come here and you realize, not everybody has that privilege. Some you take with you and you remember. And the right plaque reads, "No rumor of the foe's advance now sweeps upon the wind. No troubled thoughts at midnight haunts of loved ones left behind." So again, it was just a beautiful way to end the day. And really you get all excited, you're learning about these battlefields, but at the end of the day, these are men who paid their lives for the ultimate sacrifice. And that concludes my presentation. I'm going to hand it off to my brother Gabriel, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you. I hope everyone online can hear me, and I hope everyone can hear me just as well. So, like Evan said, I'm Gabriel. I'm Evan's youngest brother, and I'm my Pop-Up's youngest parents. So, on day 3, we arrived at both Manassas battlefields. Luckily, they're located at the same place. And it was the first major land battle of the Civil War, occurring on July 21st, 1861, just about 3 months after the firing of Fort Sumter. It only took place 30 miles southwest of Washington, too, dangerously close to the Union capital. So I can only imagine how the presidents there felt. Many believe that this would be the only engagement in the war on both Union and Confederate sides. And like I said before, I can only imagine how people at the Capitol felt. A few of them actually believed that it would be the only fighting, that it would be a one and done battle. They would show up and they would either win or lose. There was a lot of people from Washington, D.C. to go there and picnic on the countryside and watch the battle as it happens. So leading up to the Battle of Manassas, the Confederate Army, Potomac, led by Beauregard, was positioned at the Manassas Junction and had about 20,000 troops. The Confederate Army of Shenandoah, led by Brigadier General Joseph E. Johnson, had about 10,000 troops and was coming in from the east there. You can see the arrow. Sorry, on the Union side, McDowell's Army of Northern Virginia had about 35,000 troops. Or of the Potomac, sorry, just McDowell's Army. So the morning of the battle, McDowell had split his forces into 3 main columns. The column to the left, he sent it for the fords. Right down the middle, he sent a column through the stone bridge. It didn't make any progress either. And he sent a column all the way to the right around Southeast Springs to outflank the Confederates on Matthews Hill. The afternoon of the battle, the Confederate forces on Matthew Hill under Brigadier General Bernard B. retreated south to Henry House Hill to reorganize the command of Brigadier General Thomas J. Jackson. This is where Bernard B. famously said, there's Jackson standing with a stone wall. Let us determine to die here and we will conquer. Rally behind the Virginians. It's where Jackson got his famous nickname, Stonewall Jackson. He was going to die with this name. Following the Confederate retreat, McDowell failed to capture any more certain strategic and defensible terrain surrounding the battlefield, and the Confederates in response launched many bayonet charges and seized multiple Union artillery batteries. The aftermath of the battle was a Union retreat and loss. It sent a shockwave across the North and South. This was a real war, not a spectacle, and American blood on both sides will be spilled before it's over. The Confederate casualties amounted to about over 3,000, with about over 2,000 Union casualties and about 850 American deaths. And this tombstone here was actually the first civilian death of the war. It was Judith Henry. She was a woman who was shot by a cannonball that came through her house after she refused to leave when she heard that fighting was starting. So the Second Battle of Manassas followed the capture of Following the failure and collapse of the Peninsula Campaign, Union General George B. McClellan moved north to merge with General Pope's army in Manassas, Virginia. He was in retreat. He failed to seize Richmond and failed to end the war. At the same time, Confederate General Robert E. Lee rushed his army north to meet them in hopes of crushing both Union armies before they could merge and be a larger force. He also hoped to threaten Washington, D.C. to sign a peace. So the Second Battle of Manassas was fought between August 28th to the 30th on 1862. Brigadier General Stonewall Jackson had a smaller force than Pope, but was going to be reinforced by General Longstreet, whose army was a day or two's ride away. Jackson then unexpectedly took position and fortified in an unfinished sunken railroad grade and waited for Longstreet to arrive. Jackson, even more unexpectedly, rode out and made sure that the Union saw his face. He was taunting them. He was taunting Pope. This boldness enraged General Pope, who felt slighted by Jackson's taunting, and this led to his next move, which was believing that he had Jackson trapped between the Confederate Army, between the Union Army and the capital, Washington, D.C. He just sends wave after wave of Union troops into the Sunken Railroad to hopefully dislodge and capture Jackson. And although Pope makes little to no progress in seizing ground, both sides are losing devastating amounts of troops in the fight. Pope, thinking that he's finally tired out Jackson, brings up troops from his rear on Trench Ridge. He brings them up to the front to reinforce the line. The move would later go on to kind of bite him in the butt because he had nobody in his rear when Longstreet arrives. So Longstreet then arrives and pushes to Trench Ridge to outflank and take pressure off Jackson. Longstreet and Jackson successfully tricked and trapped General Pope and a large portion of the Union Army. Following intense fire from the Confederate reinforcements under Longstreet, the Union ordered a retreat to Washington. This was significant. Now the North was open to General Lee. So the aftermath of the Second Battle of Manassas was a Union defeat. General Lee was now free to enter the North, putting pressure on Washington and demoralizing the Union. Lincoln sent out yet another call for volunteers. However, the quota of 300,000 soldiers was way more difficult to fill this time. The North was now open to General Lee. Many Northerners were starting to lose faith in the war following the failure during the Peninsula Campaign and the blood spill at Second Manassas. In total, there was 125,000 troops engaged amongst both sides of the battle. There was about 13,800 plus Union casualties, 8,250 plus Confederate losses, and 22,100 plus American deaths. Now, next we arrived at Fredericksburg. Both the first and second battle of Fredericksburg were fought here. We're only going to cover the first, it's the more famous one. During the first battle of Fredericksburg, General McDowell was trying to basically rush to Richmond. So he plans on bringing his army south to Fredericksburg and then going from there to Richmond. However, to do this, he needs to cross the Rappahannock River. He cannot do this because there's no bridges anymore. So he orders pontoon bridges from Baltimore and the capital to be brought down and stationed there. I might have said McDowell, but I'm Burnside. I'm sorry, my apologies. So, but while the Union waits on the other side of the Rappahannock River for these pontoon boats to arrive so they can cross, the Confederates aren't just waiting. They now reinforce Fredericksburg. They know that that's where the Union's going to go next. They know they're going to try to cross there to get to the capital. As the pontoon boats arrive and the Union's constructing them, and as you can see, here's a small portrait reconstruction of what they would look like. The Confederates just begin firing on the Union builders as they do this. Obviously, they don't want them to complete the bridge intact. Under fire, the Union still builds a bridge as best they can. They eventually do complete the bridge. In response to Confederate firing, they send as many artillery barrages as they can to the city of Fredericksburg and completely leveled it. This was a town that has a population of about 20,000. I believe George Washington also lived here for a portion of his life too. It was a very significant town, not only to the south, but to the United States at large. It was as if Mount Vernon was attacked by the Union and the Confederate in the war. It would left a very bad taste in the mouth that they did this. At the same time, to the south of Fredericksburg, General Meade engages Jackson's line. And he pushes through for a little bit, but then Jackson holds and pushes him back. So this prevents the Union from outflanking the Confederate army going around Fredericksburg and crossing someplace else. And there again is a picture of us at the Confederate trenches where Jackson would help the line gets Meade. Following the Union crossing the Rappahannock River, unfortunately, a lot of Union soldiers began to loot the town. It happens in war. They lost control of the troops. They were fired up. They were enraged. It was a tragedy, but it happens. But after that occurs, they begin their assault on Marye's Heights. Mary's Heights was a hill, there was a highland, and at the bottom of the hill was a sunken road where the Confederates fortified with a stone wall. This was a very significant geographical element to the battle. It provided the Confederates with almost perfect cover from advancing Union troops. It provided a hill for them to station artillery upon and fire upon them in overlapping barrages. It allowed General Lee to see the whole army as it was happening, or the whole battle as it was happening. So the Confederates fortified atop Mary's Heights, and they fought in ranks of 2 to 4 men deep, providing constant rifle and artillery fire upon advancing Union troops. Constant bombardment with a lack of communication and little to no reinforcement, the Union was forced to pull back its assault on Mary's Heights. And as you can see, here's another illustration of the sunken road. This, as we'll see another picture later, it does do justice as a reconstruction of the sunken road in the wall after the battle was fought. You can see how high it comes up. I mean, that's a tall man, it's taller than me, and it's going up to his waist. So it doesn't take much to duck down and achieve almost complete cover. There's another picture of us next to the sunken road, and nice recreation of it. It is all still there, it's preserved, so luckily we were able to see it. Now next, I thought this would be significant. This is the Henry Hill House. The Henry Hill House was a house that was actually present during both battles of Fredericksburg, and it's still there. These bullet holes that you can see in this picture on the right are all bullets from the battle. This house was in the sunken road on the Confederate half of the battle. In the second story, there were sharpshooters. Unfortunately, we didn't get any photos of it, but there were in the windowsills in the second story. The first, there was initials carved into it from both Union and Confederate soldiers. And also the woman who lived in this house, her name was Martha Stevens. I might have said this is the Henry Hill House, the Stevens house. My apologies. Again, I keep getting confused. Stevens house. The woman who lived here was named Martha Stevens after Martha Washington. Washington lived here, and he's a bit of a celebrity in America. I don't know if you've heard of him. She refused to leave when she heard that the fighting was starting. She was one of the few participants at Fredericksburg who did not leave. She was seen many times during the battle going out behind the lines to fetch water from her well. She was seen tearing her garments off to provide, any sort of medical attention she could to wounded troops. And later she eventually died. I don't think it was during the battle, but she was buried next to the property. I wish we would have known this when we were there. We would have got pictures of the grave, but unfortunately I was not able to. I didn't know until recently later. And another aspect of the Battle of Fredericksburg that kind of pairs well with Martha Stevens is the Angel of Mary's Heights. Now, the Angel of Mary's Heights was a Confederate soldier named Richard R. Kirkland from South Carolina, whom carried water, warm clothes, and blankets to wounded soldiers in the middle of the battle. When soldiers on both sides realized what he was doing, they ceased fire as he went on the streets of wounded. Kirkland was seen as a hero on both sides and was forevermore known as the Angel of Mary's Heights. He was not present at the Second Battle of Fredericksburg that was fought during the Chancellorsville campaign, because during the same time he was actually fighting at Chickamauga. He unfortunately ended up dying in Chickamauga. He was leading a charge with bayonets, and he charged too far away from his own lines. So during the retreat, he got shot in the back. But I thought it was just important to mention how he was a man from South Carolina. South Carolina was the first state to secede the Union and the first state to attack the Union at Fort Sumter. And when you learn about history, it's very easy to generalize the attitude of all the people that lived there. But as you can see now, there's people from all over that were opposed to the war, or at the end of the day realized that it just was wrong. It was the right way to handle any situation, and that it was very bloody. So without that being said, I'll be passing off the third half of the presentation to my other brother, Alex.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm Sean's middle son, the middle grandchild of my papa. And I'll be going over Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, and Gettysburg. 3 of these battles that I'm covering are actually some of my favorite. To go over and research, and just to be there was such an honor. I've obviously been to Gettysburg multiple times, but to see Chancellorsville in the Wilderness, basically the same exact battle, because they're located only a mile or 2 apart. And yeah, it was just such a privilege to be on this trip and to spend so much time with my brothers and my pop-up and going to go on. So the Chancellorsville campaign, this campaign took place a few months after Fredericksburg. This time we had a General Joseph Johnson, Joseph Hooker took command of the army from Burnside. At this point, Fredericksburg was a mess. It's time we get across this river and really push towards Richmond. So Chancellorsville was known as Confederate General Robert E. Lee's perfect battle because of his risky decisions to divide his army in the presence of a much larger army, which resulted in a Confederate victory. The victory, product of Lee's audacity and Union General Joseph Hooker, time decision making was tempered by heavy casualties, including Lieutenant General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. Jackson was hit by friendly fire during this battle, which I'll cover, requiring his left arm to be amputated. In this slide, it's a depiction of where Jackson took his section of the army and did the famous flank attack. It was a 12-mile route march around Hooker's men. Right at this time, the first day of the battle already started, and it just turned into a standstill. Joseph Hooker's men formed trenches around the Chancellor House, which is almost like a motel today. It was along the Orange Turnpike, and it was basically just the center point of this battlefield. So during the night, Jackson and Lee made a plan we're going to split the army. Lee had about 12,000 men going up against Joseph Hooker's 106,000 men. Jackson would take 28,000 of his men and do this march, which I find to be just crazy to think that there's a battle going on and they decided to split the army and basically take this risk and go around the army. And there at this little plaque is where they had their meeting at nighttime. So after the flank attack, it went very successful. They hit the 15th Corps, which was just in camp. They were relaxing, nothing was going on. Next thing you know, the federal troops are describing a herd of all animals in the forest: deer, rabbit, and fox, anything you can think of that's just running through their camp. Not realizing right behind them is 20,000 Confederate troops in a 2-mile long line pushing towards their camp. It's very successful. They raid the camp, they push through. Then they hit very stubborn resistance as they get closer to the Chancellor House. At this point, nighttime is starting to fall on them because that 12-mile flank attack or march, it took all day to move 20,000 men through the wilderness. At this point, Jackson and his staff decided to scout ahead, see if they could find any openings for his men to push through. Jackson's staff is just, they're telling them, hey, like, it's getting too dark, it's too dangerous for you to be out here, let's pull back. As they were pulling back, they encountered the 18th North Carolina Regiment. At this time, everyone's very shooken up. They just were in an extremely tense battle, especially at this time of the war. I mean, they haven't seen combat like this in a while. And as they're approaching, the 18th demands who's there. They tell them who it is. They don't believe them. They open fire. Jackson is hit 3 times, twice in the arm, 1 in the hand. He goes down. Immediately, AP Hill is in the area, rushes to his side. AP Hill was hit by artillery fire. Both his ankles are cut open. He is now out of action. This part of the army that just pushed the federal troops, they're now at a standstill. So the third day of battle, which will take place near the Chancellor House again. We're at a place called Hazel Grove. And this is where the federal army had all their artillery positioned. And actually, of all people, General Stewart of the cavalry took command of Jackson's wing, and they would be fighting all through these fields, these woods. The woods will catch on fire. Prelude to what's going to happen on my next battle, which is the wilderness, and it's just pure chaos. There's so many casualties, but at the end of the day, the Confederates are victorious, and they do push the federal army back across the river. Concluding the battle, 8 days after Jackson is wounded, he recovers from his wounds, but he actually dies of pneumonia. And he's buried later on at Lexington, where he was a teacher at VMI. That's another depiction of it. But now we push forward. Since we were in the same area, I'll be covering the wilderness. So the wilderness, this is when Grant finally takes command of the army. The bloody battle of the wilderness, in which no side could claim victory, marked the first stage of a major Union offensive towards Confederate capital Richmond, ordered by the newly named Union General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant in the spring of 1864. So here you can see basically this is all wilderness here. You have some open fields, but for the most part it's very dense. It's a lot of new undergrowth, and which is, it's tall. I'm a pretty tall guy, 6'3", so it's Yeah, you're going through brush that's this tall, and you can't see through it. And as these two armies are on the Orange Turnpike and the Orange Plank Road, they collide into each other. No one knew this was gonna happen, and it turns into a massive brawl. You see the Saunders Field. Saunders Field, at the time of the battle was twice as large as this field, and this photo doesn't really do it justice. It's massive. It's probably 9 or 10 football fields wide and 3 or 4 football fields long. At this point, the Confederate Army actually has trenches all dug here, very hastily dug, and the Union Army is just pushing through these fields and they're being slaughtered, absolutely slaughtered. In this photo, it's a picture of what it probably could have looked like. This is actually from a reenactment I did back in May at was Battle of the Wilderness, which was actually on the battlefield. So that was a very special moment I got to share, especially doing all the research and reading on these guys. So throughout the night, the troops are at a standstill in the wilderness. Everything's on fire. It's pure chaos. The armies are all, units are all tangled together. You know, no one's really with who they are. The second day opens up, and the Union Army is now, all their forces are up. They're not consolidating. They have a plan, and the day is actually going very well for the Union Army. The Confederate Army is starting to retreat, pull back. They're falling apart. Longstreet's corps isn't up yet. And at this point, Lee is very desperate. We're at a place called Tap Field, which is, again, another massive field in the middle of this wilderness. And as Lee is starting to get he's starting to panic. He emotions are starting to overtake him, and he decides he wants to lead a full frontal assault. At this point, the Texans come up. Longstreet is finally arrived. And as the Texans are, coming into the field, deploying their troops, they start. It's a very famous scene where they're screaming, "Lead to the rear! Lead to the rear!" They do not want to see their major general or their commanding general lead these guys in a full frontal assault. Lee finally decides, "All right, I'll go to the rear." These men wind up pushing the Federal Army back across this field. For the 800 men in this brigade, 500 men would fall. So it's complete bloodbath again. So as Longstreet is pulling up, his men are now along the Orange Plank Road. It's again pure chaos. So you have these linear formations. I mean, these men are working in lines, two rows deep, and they're now entangled in this thick brush in the wilderness, and everything's on fire again, and men are falling everywhere. As Longstreet is riding up, he's actually hit by friendly fire, very close to where Jackson was hit, only 2 miles away. In the photo, General Jenkins is shot through the head. The bullet passes through and hits Longstreet in the foot. They both go down, realizing that his men just shot their own general. Some of them begin to weep. They think they killed him. As he's being carried off, he raises his hand, and the men kind of give a cheer, thinking, "Oh, he's not dead. He's going to be okay." And he spends about 6 months in Richmond recovering. So horror on the Orange Plank Road. The Orange Plank Road, just to be in this section, we were able to walk through the wilderness, see the monuments, and it's so confusing. Like someone who, like me, who goes to battlefields a lot and see these places, I was completely lost in how these guys moved the armies through here. You can see where Hancock, who has the 1st Division, has all trenches dug along the road and through the woods. Federal armies pushing through, and they wind up stopping the Confederate forces. They can't get through, and again, another bloodbath. And this is just to show what is to come the next few months. Here, I just wanted to kind of throw like a visual of what a regiment would have looked like, just to kind of give you the scale of what these men are going through. Here, I decided to pick the 15th Regiment of New Jersey. For us, New Jersey people, it was very home to us. To be so far away in Virginia and to think, our guys were there too. Especially where my father is buried. The 12th New Jersey troops are actually buried in the same cemetery, so not too far from him. So I just wanted to add that to them. So now this takes us to a battlefield we didn't really see for too long. We're only there for about 20 minutes. This is right next to the Wilderness Battlefield, but this is the Spotsylvania Battlefield. To me, it was basically a nice visual of the show of what's to come. Petersburg is the trenches, the amount of trenches that are still there, and some of them are still very deep. You can see this is only a few days after the Wilderness, as Lee and his troops pulled back and started making their way closer towards Richmond. It would almost be like a flank maneuver. Just after every battle, They're just slowly inching towards Richmond, pushing the Confederate Army back. And trench warfare is really starting to take shape in the Civil War. It's not really that linear formation. It's now dug in positions and see how long it takes until one person gives up and runs out of ammunition, food, and this is the horseshoe or the mule shoe that they called it. Yeah, the mule shoe. There, and you can see the Federal Army did break through. They were pushed back by the Confederate Army, but throughout the night, the Confederate Army slipped back and made it closer to Richmond. The very famous quote from Grant: "It takes all summer." So basically, he promised Lincoln when Lincoln put him in command, like it's like, I'm not gonna waste your troops, I'm not gonna waste your time. We're gonna get this done. We're gonna get to Richmond. If it takes all summer, well, it took the rest of the war, which is about say 9 or 10 months after he made this promise. So did it take longer? Yes, but he wanted to eventually take in Richmond, and the Confederate Army a few months later on did surrender. So now that leads us to the big Gettysburg. This is a very dear place to me. My first reenactment I went with my father in 2008 was the 145th Gettysburg. At the time, I had no idea what the Civil War was. We in New Jersey don't really teach it that much in school. We only spent a week on it. But Gettysburg is very dear in my heart. And the museum there, if no one's ever been there, I highly recommend at least spend 2 days in that museum because we spent maybe 6 hours. And it wasn't enough. It was just absolutely gorgeous. So here we wound up doing the full tour. We wanted to see everything in this museum. And one of the most famous paintings that they have there and displays would be this
Cyclorama.
I always say panoramic cyclorama painting of Pickett's Charge. And you're on top of a platform, and it's just a 360 of what's going on. Very close to where the museum is to where this event happened. And it was just breathtaking. I mean, the noise that they added, the artillery barrage, the musket fire, the men shouting. It's very moving. I'm not gonna lie, we were crying. It's unreal how they did this. And I highly recommend if you have the chance to take the time to go see this. So now the opening stages of Gettysburg. So Gettysburg, like where we grew up in Hamilton, is a junction town. So the town had about, I want to say it was about 20,000 residents. And it was all major highways were leading into the town. At this point in the war, Chancellorsville happened 2 months earlier, and the Confederate Army, their morale was up. They're ready to go into the North again. And Lee with 75,000 men invades the North. And this time, instead of going through Maryland, actually they did go through Maryland. They actually passed through Antietam, and there were still skeletons everywhere in some parts of the section. They were seeing sometimes their friends, but they made it through. And they got all the way into Pennsylvania. And on the first day, the Federal Army didn't catch up yet. The way they came around, and the Federal Army was coming this way from DC. And at this point, there was only about 2,100 Federal cavalry, and there was some militia in town stationed here. And at this point, General John Buford deploys his men along McPherson Ridge. And basically, they're just waiting. You know, they see reports, they can see activity. You know, Federal Army's near. There's scouting parties. There's everything's coming. And then July 1st of 1863, the Confederate Army finally makes their way towards town, and they hit very stubborn resistance to John Buford's men. For hours, they were fighting, and then the Federal Army comes up. And now at this point, Lee's like, we have to full send it. We have to send everyone in. This, you know, we want to fight closer towards Harrisburg or even DC, but it is what it is. You know, we're here. We're not going to retreat. And the first day of what a lot of people don't know is actually the bloodiest day of the battle. I mean, it was around 20,000 casualties alone on day one. So in this photo, just for reference, this is the railroad cut. This is a scene of pure carnage as the Confederate Army, and the railroad cut is right around here. The Confederate Army is sweeping basically this way, and they're going towards town, which is located over here. Confederate Army takes the position scene. It's basically a pre-dug trench for us. When you get in there, Gabe actually did go down there. It's not some sections about 20 feet deep.
Yeah,
So you can't really get up and shoot. And at this point, the Federal Army is coming from this direction. And as they're pushing here, they catch the Confederates in here and just start slaughtering them. And it's the very famous Black Hat Brigade, which is the Iron Brigade. And that's just a grand scheme of what's going on the first day. So again, the Irish Brigade, we're Irish boys, you know, our father was very Irish. And I just wanted to add this slide because the Irish Brigade did fight here and they suffered extreme casualties. The Irish blood and Irish bones cover the terrible field today, wrote one soldier. We are slaughtered like sheep. In July of 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg, about 320 of the Irish Brigade's remaining 530 soldiers were killed. Culp's Hill. Culp's Hill is very overlooked because of Little Round Top. All are significant, all are important, but Culp's Hill is it's a hill inside the town and it commands the town. I mean, if you have this section, you can see where it's located on the Union Fishhook. If the Confederates can capture this, they can just push down the line and push these men towards DC. But you can just see in this painting, I mean, the pure carnage and the whole hill is littered with bodies. And one of the soldiers who was actually fighting on the Confederate side was that was his family property. He decided Gettysburg's only about 7 miles from Virginia. And he decided he wanted to fight for the Confederate Army, and he was killed on his family property. Now that leads to the second half of day 2, which is Longstreet's flank attack towards the Round Tops. So this leads us to Devil's Den, which is one of the coolest, places on the battlefield. I mean, these boulders were brought here from the Ice Age. You can actually, one of the boulders, I couldn't find it. I've been trying to find it for years, but you can actually see a dinosaur footprint in it. So I thought that was very cool. If you want to go try and find it, I highly suggest it. But Devil's Den was, again, just pure chaos. These linear formations are moving towards the Round Tops, and they're now hitting these boulders. You can't push men through these. So now everything's getting scattered, everything's breaking up. These men are under fire, which you'll see in the next slide. You can see they call this Death Valley for good reasons, because you can just see these men are fighting behind rocks and it's hand-to-hand combat. Very famous painting of General Hood, who would be mortally wounded during the battle. He would recover, but he would lose the use of his left arm. But you can just see this is where the Texan Brigade came up and they pushed back Sickles' men who broke the fishhook. But it's just pure chaos. Here's one shot I'm very happy with. I've never seen this painting. I wanted to try and recreate it. So this is a painting of, you can see the 20th Maine up on the Round Tops and the Confederate Army basically in the same exact position in this photo. You can just see how crazy it's like. The hill doesn't look that big, but when you're actually there, it's a massive hill, and you can see they commanded the field when they had that, and they knew if they lost this position, the whole fishhook that the Union Army created would be lost. So now that leads us to day 3. Day 3 is one of the more popular days of the battle, which is the famous Pickett's Charge. So around 1 p.m., the Confederate Army unleashed 150 artillery pieces for an hour barrage. It was so intense that the barrage was that there are actually reports in New York City that they heard the ball. I mean, this is the largest barrage in the world at the time. I mean, it's unreal. I think this is a very great painting just to depict the pure chaos of this. I mean, you have air bursts and everything you can think of just raining down these men on both sides. Pickett's Charge. After the bombardment, the Confederate Army is running low on ammunition, and Longstreet finally gives General Pickett the command, move your men forward. Around 15,000 Confederate troops and about a 1.5 mile long line would just be coming across this field here, which is Pickett's Charge. The Union Army would be behind this stone wall, just like at Fredericksburg was for the Confederates. As these men are, crossing this field, they are still under heavy artillery, canister, everything you can think of tearing these poor guys up. And as they hit the Chambersburg, I think it's the Chambersburg Road, Chambersburg Pike, they are now within musket fire, and these men are just being cut to pieces. So death at the wall. This is have you ever seen the movie Gettysburg? This is a depiction of General Armistead, who was one of the brigade commanders of Pickett. His brigade was actually the ones who reached the wall. The very famous, he led his men, put his talon and sword, running across the field. He would be wounded at the wall and died a few days later from a chest wound. But that's another depiction of where the Confederate Army was crossing. The first photo was more over here, but you can just see it's a 1.5 mile long field that is open.
Right here,
And there's fences that these men are having to cross over while on fire. Everything is just slowing them up. And in the end, the
Doesn't
Confederate
matter
Army,
why they
they don't break through. Conclusion of the battle, there was 51,000 casualties in these 3 days. I mean, that is just unheard of at the time. I mean, you look at Bull Run, you have 830, and that was pure shot. 2.5 years later, 51,000 casualties in 3 days. It would leave this town in ruins for months after the war. Almost every barn, every house would become a field hospital. And many of the soldiers would stay there until September, October, November, still just recovering from this. One of the you can't really see the buildings over there, but two farms on this property were actually owned by free black men. They financially were never to recover. Their farms are just destroyed as they're plowing. Bodies are coming up and they're breaking plows from hitting equipment. And it's just sad seeing a lot of things people don't realize is not just the soldiers, but the civilian aspect.
Here it is.
So this is the video. It gets started. So now you can see the real grand scale of what's going on is that's day 2 fighting over here, but this is where the Confederate Army was coming across in day 3.
Just wild. You can imagine. Just stunning.
There was one of the farms I was talking about from the free black man.
It's part of the job. I presume you made that charge, you walked that field.
I have walked that field, yeah. So
That's what we do.
one thing I did mention earlier was like reenact. I am a reenactor, and back in I believe it was 2017 before COVID, we actually did the Barksdale, Mississippi charge, which wasn't biggest charge, but we still got to cross this field, and it's a haul. Like it's pretty. It doesn't seem that far, but I mean, 1.5 miles in linear formation with hundreds of guys. I mean, it takes good 20-30 minutes, and we weren't under fire. So I mean, like, just to show how long we have to take it for these guys while under fire, psychologically, you're seeing your best friends, your brothers go right in front of you, and you just have to keep moving. I couldn't even imagine how these guys did it. So now the very famous Pennsylvania Monument, you can't visit. It's one of the largest monuments in the country, and around the bottom flag, you can see me standing there. Those are all from Pennsylvania who fought for the army, and I mean, all their names are there. Some are listed who were killed here. And when you go on top, there are staircases which are very treacherous. I almost died going up one, but it's just part of the thrill of it. When you get up there, you really see everything, and it's quite remarkable. And especially the preservation effort that the Park Service is putting in, cutting down trees, removing buildings that weren't there. You really start to see the grand scale of this battle and what these men must have saw.
So Alex, do you remember what's on your father's gravestone?
I did. One thing I actually should have brought up at my Chances Roll presentation was on top of my father's gravestone is Jackson's last famous words, which is let us cross over the river and rest upon the shade of the trees. So my father loved Jackson. Huge Civil War buff. He got me into it, shaped my life, and I owe it all to him. We all do. So
Thank you.
very much.